we don't need language. This is more than you asked. I wouldn't be a very good coach. Nothing charming is ever going to come again. I call myself poetry-phobic. We're all Barbies. That's an easy one. I knew it. Darn. See, that's my hope. Oh yeah, he gets me so well. And all the women in the women's restroom started calling each other Barbie. Hi Barbie, hi Barbie, hi Barbie. In and out, all the way through the...
This is Post Podcast, episode number 3, and our guest is Dr. Beth Rosenberg. Here is the introduction. Dr. Beth Rosenberg, a remarkable educator and expert in the field of literature and culture. Dr. Rosenberg's academic journey is nothing short of inspiring, with her expertise spanning across 20th and 21st century British literature, modernism, essays, memoirs, women's literature, and the rich history of British literature. Dr. Rosenberg's contributions to the literary world are truly exceptional, having published 2 insightful books, Virginia Woolf and Samuel Johnson, Common Readers, and co-edited a collection titled Virginia Woolf and the Essay. Her academic pursuits have led her to explore the works of iconic authors like Virginia Woolf, Elena Ferrante, Carol Phillips, Anita Desai, offering fresh perspectives and critical insights that resonate with literature enthusiasts around the world. Beyond her extensive literary expertise, Dr. Rosenberg's current research and interests are in the realm of creative nonfiction. She delves into its captivating history and development, with a particular focus on works penned by women, shedding light on a vital aspect of literature that has often been underexplored. So how does it sound?
Sounds really good. Sounds accurate, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, leading up to the interest in the nonfiction. Are you serious that that was written by ChatGPT?
Yes, that's the artificial intelligence introducing our guests.
There are a couple words that you can tell, but yeah, I mean, that was good enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. It's a little trick that allows us to stay unbiased in our introductions, and everything praisey comes from artificial intelligence, and everything critical comes from this one too.
So well, at least it says I'm doing what I think I'm doing, which is, helpful. So
you mentioned that this aspect about focusing on creative nonfiction may not be fully accurate. What did you mean by that?
No, I think it is accurate.
Okay.
I think that the introduction leads from my past work all the way up to my current interests, and it shows, which is interesting because, until you get older and you see what you've done over 10, 20, 30 years, you don't really see the trajectory that your interests lead you. And starting with Virginia Woolf's, like with Samuel Johnson, I was working on nonfiction then. I wasn't working on her fiction. And then the book with the essay, and I with my collaborator, were really one of the first to focus on Woolf's nonfiction prose. And then what? And then I started to become more interested, and then I started to develop classes that could be taught to creative writers. And I got interested in a more contemporary memoir. I like the more experimental memoirs. And then I wrote a couple of my own small pieces, and that is the beginning of what's next and what I'm looking to do for my next I'm currently working on, this is more than you asked, but I'm currently working on 2 books at the same time, which is not recommended at all. And the one is an academic book and one is more personal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a memoir, but I'm really striving to look for a way that I can combine the 2. Mm-hmm. So that maybe I'm really working on 1 book.
I see. Is it because the theme is unifying, or?
Well, because the theme, because I think that whatever people say, that scholarship is creative. Mm-hmm. I think that scholarship always, I mean, if you look at, I say this to my undergrads too, you know, if you look at the topics that you write on, you probably find that you're writing on the same topics or some version of the same topic every time. And I think it's because we each have our own preoccupations. Mm-hmm. And I think I've always been preoccupied with how people tell personal stories, but not through fiction.
I think, and this is kind of a recurring pattern, that ChatGPT excludes your teaching side of things. So yes. Would you be willing to add this part of your biography into this introduction?
Sure. I was hired as a modernist,
mm-hmm.
a British modernist, at a time 20 plus years ago when there was actually a requirement for British modernism and American modernism, but they weren't really combined, and they needed someone to teach it. Within 2 or 3 years, the curriculum got revised, and that requirement was, those 2 requirements, British and American modernism, were pretty much conflated. But this class was put into a stock with a bunch of 20th century classes, and to be completely candid, I have rarely gotten to teach my undergraduate modernism class in the last 10 years at least, because the curriculum is so broad and students are so, I'm talking undergraduates, are so unfamiliar with modernism that and with British literature, because being in the Southwest, British is like so foreign to them that they don't pick it, and then I got to teach something else, which is another reason why I've shifted some of my interests also more specifically to women's literature and gender, because I can teach those classes. It's funny how our research and our teaching are really dependent on each other. So I've become more interested in nonfiction and women's literature because those classes get enrolled.
Have you checked your Rate My Professor rating?
I have, and I don't want to do it again at all. Every couple of years I'm like, well, maybe there's something new on there. Uh-huh. And I know, and I have had students tell me this before, I have a reputation of being very hard. Mm-hmm. And you know, what I say to my students is that I have more confidence in them than they probably have in themselves. And if I were a sports coach, right, and you were just walking around the track, I wouldn't be a very good coach if I didn't say pick up the pace a little bit, right? And that's the way that I see myself doing that. So I think that I try to set things up so that students are ultimately responsible for what happens in the class, and sometimes they just don't like it, and I'll get very negative Rate My Professors. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I have like really good ones too, like people saying, I don't know what problem that person had, but I think it's a matter of, do you want to do the work or not? On the other hand, the other way that I use, when I was taking them a little bit more seriously, is I do look at the negative ones. I do take them to heart and student evaluations, and I see if there's something valuable that I could learn about my teaching from how they're responding. So mm-hmm. I'm always changing what I'm doing based on what I hear. When I can get evaluations, which we're not getting very many of online these days, but from students, I tell them, I'm honest. I say, if you have something constructive to say about the class or about the teaching or the organization or the content, that I would love to hear. It really hurts my feelings, though, when people are not nice and they attack me. And, it's just not very constructive. So I try to ask them to be as constructive as possible so that I can actually learn from my mistakes.
In Virginia Woolf's The Oxford Street Tide, she says that the charms of modern London is there not to last but to pass. What does it mean?
The charms of modern London are not to last but to pass, meaning that the future will come and what is charming now may not be charming in the future.
What is charming now and what is not being...
You mean charming in our world?
Yes, in modern
Children
world.
are charming.
Children are charming.
Cats are charming. Yeah, those are the things these days that make me feel like charmed.
So when you look at the future, do you feel that potential charm changing in the negative way or in the positive way?
I told you, as I said before, I try to be an optimist. I don't want to say that these charms are going to, you know, we're in a very dark time and it's very easy to think that nothing charming is ever going to come again. But I have to have faith that human beings are going to work it out somehow. Maybe not forever, but at least as long as I'm on this earth.
But isn't this an example of cruel optimism?
That was a trick question. Okay, so sure, yeah.
Let's further just the record and to help our audience understand, what is cruel optimism?
Cruel optimism is something that seduces you into thinking that you will like, that something will be good, positive, say for example, marriage, right? And then you get into the marriage and you find out it's not what you thought, and that's the cruelty of it.
But you cannot reject it anymore because it would mean, well, a destruction of the whole world.
It would mean a destruction of ways of organizing culture. However, the concept that I like from an affect theory that I like is from Sarah Ahmed, and she talks about affect aliens. I love that. It's so alliterative. And basically what that means is that you are other than to the group that feels a certain affect. So for example, if you don't follow the marriage paradigm, right, which is supposed to be positive, then you're an alien to the affect that's associated with marriage. Then the other thing is you go to, well, it's interesting because I'm single, right? So I'm not invited to parties where there are couples because I think I'm an affect alien, right? I don't experience that kind of, I mean, I don't mind, but it disrupts the order of the way people think their lives are supposed to evolve. Like another thing that I think is really interesting is houses, owning a house, right? And it's like this goal of, you know, optimism and to get to, and you get your own home, especially in American culture. But if you don't own a home, then you're an affect alien because somehow that owning that house doesn't bring you the same kind of pleasurable affect that it brings
because
to other people.
Owning a house, being married, having another specific characteristic becomes an identity marker, and as long as you don't share those identity markers with other people, especially if those identity markers are prevalent in the society, that alienates us in psychological sense, human sense in general, and in socioeconomic sense.
And just a general feeling of belonging. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about this. Another thing, you know, that's like kind of cruel optimism is like children, right? And that part of the goal is to meet a partner, to have a family, and even, you know, same-sex relationships, they have these same goals, right? But what happens if you're not married and you have a child? Right? That makes you an alien to that paradigm too. Or not to mention that children can be a heartbreak. I mean, I just don't know any parents that have, you know, children are great when they're like infants, right? And they need you and they're just kind of big blob of biology. And then when they start to individuate and become themselves, there comes a sense of alienation, not to mention that, you know, there's this desire to give or make your child into those things that you weren't, or that you didn't have, or that you should have had, and then your child ends up being completely uninterested. That's cruel optimism, right? Because it's more painful than it is fulfilling sometimes. And so your relationship with your children, it's about something else, you know. Anyway, so yeah, that's what I think about cruel optimism and being an alien, affect alien.
You are a Virginia Woolf scholar, and you're also a modernist. And it appears that one of the key underlining concepts of modernism, and specifically of Virginia Woolf's philosophy, is to observe everything and notice everything. Mm-hmm. There is this sense of the necessity of awareness that's happening with literature and criticism. So what do you think? What do you think it means for a writer to be aware of their time period?
You mean of, like, what does it mean, like, for Woolf to be aware of the early 20th century? Yeah,
for example, she specifically writes in terms of being a modernist. You know how I think this pattern starts kind of like in the Enlightenment when Kant writes, and he is aware of being an Enlightenment writer. He's like, I am an Enlightenment writer. I'm writing in the Enlightenment period, but we're still striving for Enlightenment. And Virginia Woolf does something very similar in terms of modernism. She's aware of being a modernist. She writes as a modernist, and she calls herself a modernist.
Well, I'll take exception there, unless you know something I don't, which you could. I don't think she ever calls herself a modernist. I think that modernism is a label that comes later. I think, like, she has an essay where she talks about the Edwardians and the Georgians, or she talks about the spiritualists and the materialists. So let's, like, I should swing those. So the materialists and the Edwardians are more like Victorian writers, and the writers in the modern period who insisted on having, like, linear plots and descriptions of the, you know, outside environment, whereas the Georgians and the spiritualists are the writers who deal with the internal perceptions. And I think she talks about a lot of writers in those terms, not so much about herself. Mm-hmm. She has one essay called How to Read a Contemporary, or How to Judge a Contemporary. And basically she comes out and, you know, the question is, how do you judge your contemporaries? Are they good or are they bad? And she says you can't, which makes sense that you can't, because we need time and perspective.
In her other essay, the Death of Moth.
Death of a Moth?
Death of the Moth,
yes.
That's a fascinating one. And I think this one links better to the question I'm trying to ask, because in that essay, she is using a mundane part of everyday story, of everyday experience, to draw our attention to something larger that is happening with the society, right, and right, everything. Isn't that a type of awareness of the period that she expresses?
I think you're asking her to have an awareness. I don't think she's, I think you're giving her more credit.
I see.
Yeah, I don't think she's aware.
Mm-hmm.
I think she wants to do something different from those who preceded her. I think she knows she's experimenting always. And so something like The Death of the Moth is an experiment. It's an experiment in consciousness and narrative and how it works. So she knows she's doing something different. But does she know that it's modernist and that a bunch of other people are trying to do it? Because Woolf hated to hear a critic say that she was influenced by someone. So she didn't read Ulysses for a long time because she didn't want people to think that she was influenced by it, and she wouldn't read Freud for a while either because she was afraid people would say that she was influenced by Freud, and she wanted to be utterly like original. This professor once that I had gave this example of the difference between affect and effect. My friends thought this was kind of funny, but I don't know if other people will. So effect is when you're punched in the nose, and affect is the blood that comes afterwards. Mm-hmm. So affect is a feeling. I had at this conference a lot of questions about, like, is affect the same as emotions? And it's a visceral thing. It circulates everywhere. It doesn't only exist in people, right? It exists in objects and groups of objects. So for example, you're invited to, well, I'm stealing this example from somebody, a dinner party, and it makes you happy because you know you're going to a dinner party, but there's nothing inherent in the individuals or the party itself that should be making you happy. It's a feeling that you have almost, I don't know if I want to say projected, but it's a feeling that you get from a certain event. You know, whether it's true or not, that's a whole nother thing. So affect is knowledge gained through the body, a body in space. And that's why I think that moving through space and through a socio-cultural, historical environments. And that's why I think women and men are different, because our affect has to be different, because we have different kinds of literal bodies that move through the same socio-economic cultural spaces, but we have different responses than male bodies. And then you could talk about queer bodies, you know, black bodies, you know, just the whole range of differences, and all of those things will create different affects.
She was the one who published everything, a full collection of Freudian works in English. And she was writing Miss Dalloway when she was reading Ulysses at the same time.
Are you saying that to me, or are you asking?
No, but
I don't think she was reading
Doesn't
Ulysses.
Doesn't it contradict the idea of her being influenced by those works?
I don't. Was she reading Ulysses at the same time as she was writing Mrs. Dalloway?
Yes, I think she was. But I might be mistaken. That's all right. Let's entertain this idea. What if she was?
Okay, let's. Well, okay.
I'll double check. We'll put it here.
Okay, that's fine. It hardly matters, because another thing I tell my students when I start to talk about stream of consciousness, right? When you learn it, when students learn it, like maybe in high school, right? You think it's one style, stream of consciousness. But what you realize when you start to read the Modernists is that there is no one stream of consciousness style. So what Joyce does is actually quite different from what Woolf does, which is actually quite different from what Conrad does, or Ford Madox Ford, or Dorothy Richardson. They all are.
Or any of the poets, including Pound and Eliot.
Well, in terms of like interiority.
Interiority.
Yeah.
And time.
And time. And that's mostly what I'm thinking about. The poetry is different. I make no claims to being an expert at the poetry. I like to teach undergraduates poetry because they're intimidated by it, and I can calm them and tell them that I call myself poetryphobic. In other words, I like to read it. I like to read it for pleasure. I like to discover it with students, but don't ask me to put a critical pen to it, to write an essay about it, to analyze it, because I find poetry's, you know, very technical if you're any good at writing about it, and I'm just not technical like that. So like, for example, Eliot, right? I call him the guy I love to hate, because his poetry is so musical and so beautiful that you can't deny it. But do I like him as a human being, as a man, politically? No, I do not. But and then the question becomes, do I not teach him because I don't like him? And I haven't reached that point that, you know, I'm not going to teach him because I don't like him. Once affect
Interconnectedness?
Translates in the mind, it's not affect anymore. Right?
Because there is something else involved, right?
Because there's your mind involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think in terms of the minute, like, because people are saying, well, what's the difference between like interiority, like consciousness, stream of consciousness, and interiority and affect? Because, well, interiority, whatever it is, you can't explain it. Because the minute you put an intellectual concept on affect, it ceases to be affect. So I was saying, like, for stream of consciousness that we talked about before, stream of consciousness is about narrative. Narrative is about language. And the only thing about fiction that it's trying to do is trying to imitate what the mind does. But it does it in words. So it's not real. So the stream of consciousness you see in a novel, it's not really the way consciousness works. It's just an attempt to imitate it on the page through language. So the minute we articulate or put into language or understanding of any kind, the affect turns into something else. And in fact, someone said, well, I've been told that there's like a continuum between affect and emotion. And in a way, I would say that all emotion is affect, but not all affect is emotion. And emotion is something that we label. Like we label a feeling. We say, oh, I am happy. That is my happy emotion. Or I'm sad. But your body doesn't know this until you name it.
After attending several conferences and listening to other people's presentations, I've noticed how when they are presenting on a specific writer that had a questionable past, they would start by addressing that questionable past and almost like apologizing. I attended a panel on Gertrude Stein.
And what did they complain about?
The Gertrude Stein had some collaborations
in France?
In France during the World War II. And
she was Jewish, though.
That writer, academic, who is also a head of Gertrude Stein Society, she started her speech by saying, I'm sorry that Gertrude Stein had this past. However, we want to still talk about her. I've heard many similar conversations about Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, and so many of the modernists.
So it's so funny because I think that Woolf, even though she was married to a Jewish guy, I think she was anti-Semitic too. But people, they won't even apologize.
But do you think there is a need to apologize? Because you almost did the same with T.S. Eliot just a second ago.
Well, I'm not apologizing for him, but I don't know. Is it necessary? No, you don't have to apologize, but if it's pertinent, you have to acknowledge it, right?
What does it add to the discussion, to the discourse?
Well, I think it tells you from what point of privilege they come from, right? So, there's a reason why, I mean, up until, I don't know, 30 years ago, most of the modernists that we knew of were men. Even Virginia Woolf wasn't recognized as significant until around the 60s. And that's because they were all, socioeconomically placed to get the kind of education that they needed, most of them at good universities, right, like Ivy Leagues, and they developed kind of the standards for what we think modernism is. But I do have to say that modernism in the last 30 years has gone through major revision, and especially since the 70s when the feminists came around, there was a lot of archival digging so that we discovered other modernists of equal importance who were women. And, with the whole postmodern trend, the values shift and change too. Well, one of the things about affect by
Sylvan Tomkins?
Sylvan Tomkins is you feel something happens that makes you sad and you cry, right? That's the affect, is your body reacting, crying, or you smile if it makes you happy. And so I just think...
Offering a feedback to a stimuli.
Yeah, feedback to a stimuli, to whatever that happens to be.
And I'm just doing that to, well, bullet mark it in the video so people who are watching would be able to understand our discussion on affect. So affect has to do with the stimuli, the initial message that being sent, the receiving.
But when you say message, you got to be clear though that it's not like a verbal message.
So how would we?
Some kind of encounter.
Okay, encounter with an intensity.
With an intensity.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I'll go for that.
okay. Affect starts with an encounter with an intensity. The magnitude of possible reactions to this intensity, and the multitude of those magnitudes of reactions processed by unconscious mind,
yeah,
and returned into the original point of intensity.
And when you say returned, do you mean
in terms of feedback, like crying?
Crying. Oh, okay, like crying. So we're not even going to say, I feel sad to that person who made us feel sad.
No.
No, we just cry, and then they know. And then
And
that
then they
causes an affect in that person
Yes.
as well. And it's like a feedback loop. Yeah, okay, I'll get with that.
With this pattern of acknowledging issues of the past associated with anti-Semitism, racism, gender inequalities, and socioeconomic inequalities, it appears that academia in its current state is very hesitant to speak up their minds. Maybe in a way it's conditioned.
In certain areas, they're hesitant.
Do you agree with this assessment? If not, why? If yes, how do we get out of this
I see where
hesitance?
the controversy is. Okay, so in certain ways, academia is willing to speak up, right? METOO movement, Black Lives Matter, when there was violence against Asians. You know, in fact, our department developed a DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion committee based specifically for those reasons, to help diversify both faculty and see what we could do for students. Now, I think maybe what you're referring to is the current politics that are going on, which will become historical if this video stays anywhere, with Israeli-Hamas conflict, if we can call it that. And what personally I find kind of stunning is how silent the university remains about it. So in my reaching out to administrators, asking them, you know, please say something to your Muslim and Jewish students, because it's both student bodies, about that you're aware that they're there, that things are happening, and that we support you. Pretty much I was met with silence. And then I was given a link to the president, the university president's statement dated October 11th to consult. But, you know, we were just talking about morning news. So I wake up every morning, I hear what's going on, and now I was just trying to think, there's some policies that are trying to go through to ask universities to make statements against anti-Semitism. So I've already written to the dean, so I'll have to wake up some morning really, really upset. Then I'll write to the provost or something. But I just wonder if our university, and you know, we could have the reverse. I mean, what is it going to take for our university to say something? Is it going to take, you know, like at Cornell, someone making literal threats, you know, to students to make us say something? And as a Jewish professor with a name like Rosenberg, I don't please all of my students. I know that there have been some who've been, you know, upset with me over various reasons through the years. You know, how am I supposed to feel safe in my classroom? You know, as a Jewish professor, I don't feel safe, which was the same thing that was said during the Black Lives Matter for some of our faculty of color, and that resonated, but for some reason, I don't know why, I'm just becoming to this awareness of how anti-Semitism circulates and how it works. Because to be honest, before this, as a third generation Jewish woman. I identified as American, very assimilated, and never really thought of as a secular Jew much about what that meant. So
just the other day, The Economist published an article outlining the number of people supporting Palestine and Israel online, and it turns out that the support for Palestine is 4 times larger than support for Israel. Why do you think that is happening?
Because people don't understand, and you know what I say to my friends and people who care what I think, there's no reason to pick a side. I think that's the problem, is that you're picking a side because, you know, on the one hand, Israel's justified in what it has to do. On the other hand, I don't agree with everything Israel is doing. I don't want people to misunderstand me as, you know, a hardcore Zionist. You know, without getting too much into it, you know, I just think that, you know, yes, Israel has the power and they used it because something really, really horrible happened and made them feel not safe. And I'm glad that the United States is involved in these negotiations. And I'm also glad that other Middle Eastern countries are involved, which is really what makes the difference between this time and other times. Because I think if the community of the Middle East can find a way of negotiating this situation, it will be much better for everyone. Mm-hmm. That's my naive view of everything. So I don't know, I mean, I just think people don't understand the depth of the problem. You know, it's a 2,000-year-old problem. You know, and it's digressed into a cycle of violence. And if I might say, since this is for the English department, I keep thinking about Yeats. You know, the center does not hold, and all the, you know, Civil War.
The falcon cannot hear the falconer.
Yeah, and the, you know, his war poems and the kind of violence that, you know, he expresses, that people are feeling, and, you know, in this beautiful poetry of his. You know, a terrible beauty is born, right? That's the line that I keep thinking of too, because it's a terrible, whatever comes out of this, hopefully is something new, but it's born out of something terribly.
I'm really glad that you brought up Yeats. I mean, apart from the context in which Yeats is writing with the Irish independence and the aftermath of the World War I, he is bringing up that 2,000-year-old conflict that you referred to as. I would also make a claim that it's not 2,000-year-old. I would say like 4,000 years old, maybe even deeper. You can find traces like in Gilgamesh talking about very similar attitudes and opinions that are there. But would you qualify that what is happening right now is what Yeats describes as that beast that is slouching right now towards Bethlehem, literally, to be born?
That's, well, if I understand that line correctly, it's kind of apocalyptic, right? It's not like
yes, it is. He's
strolling bravely towards Bethlehem. He's slouching. So I prefer, I'm not an apocalyptic person. I prefer to think, I hope not, I guess is what I'm saying. I hope not.
If everyone in the entire world would be able to understand the effect, there are going to be no more conflicts, no more wars.
No, I don't think so.
Why?
Because no more conflicts, no more wars takes like logical thought. And I don't think affect is in that realm. I think we might feel a lot of things, but no.
But one of the implications of affect, that language is not a tool of communication. It is a feedback tool that requires adjustment of the original message, stimuli, things like that, to produce a different type of affect. It is not that illogical to extrapolate and to entertain the idea that if every single person understands, like on the conscious level, that there is a subconscious element to our interactions, and if we would be able to navigate our messages, our stimuli through that prism of affective response, then every person would be empathic, every person would feel a pain and effect of other person on the different level, and the understanding of the magnitude of potential responses should be able to at least move us into direction of non-conflicting relationship.
I still don't agree
You
with that.
still don't agree with that?
No, I don't.
Why? Please do.
Because one, affects are they're so ubiquitous. There are so many affects that hit us all at the same time, all the time. And just because someone else understands, like has empathy, right, which is not really affect, we talked about that too, does not mean that it's going to make change. Like with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, children are being killed on both ends, right? So I'm sure that there's, you know, empathy, but does that clear the political problems? Obviously it doesn't, because if it did, it would.
It doesn't, because everyone outside of that picture on the larger scheme of things still view language as a tool of communication. Well, it's not.
But without language, you can't communicate. You can't communicate your own affect. You can't communicate it to yourself. You can't communicate it to another person. So we don't want to like vilify language and say we don't need language. You know, we need language.
We do.
To express these things, because affect exists on such a non-verbal level.
But that's the idea.
But like, it's almost like you're saying like that we would all have be not just empathic, but we'd be you know,
aware of subconscious
what's the
elements.
word I'm looking for? Paranormal. You know what I mean? We'd be able to read each other's minds through affect. You know, and that's just.
I was going to say a pair of ragged claws, but
no, yeah, no, that too. But I just don't think. I don't know. I just.
Because that's the thing. When we keep talking about language, that we are trying to emphasize that we are using language to communicate something. We want to communicate empathy. We want to communicate Israeli side of things. We want to communicate Palestinian side of things. We want to communicate Ukrainian side, Russian, whatever. But it's not about communicating it. And that's what we are missing.
It's about feeling it?
It's about feeling. It's about also feeling and understanding that other person experience affect by ultimately the same rules as you are experiencing affect.
Okay.
And that changes the way you understand language. And that kind of led me to my other question, that it is impossible. Therefore, they're going to be worse.
Okay. So we agree.
This interesting difference between novels and works of fiction, non-fiction, written by women and men that invoke experiences of the opposite genders. What do you think about male characters written by women and female characters written by men?
That's an easy one.
Okay.
Well, first of all, like the big example about male characters writing about women is Joyce and his last chapter. And I have, well, oh, okay, so it's not quite, what I'm answering is, do men write like women, and do women write like men? And I would say yes, because sometimes I'll put up example from Mary Wollstonecraft, and then an example from the Molly section, and I'll ask students what the gender is of the author, and they always guess the opposite, because Wollstonecraft is so enlightenment oriented, so reason and logically
Republican even, I would say.
Yeah, in a sense, yes. Whereas Joyce, you know, gets the feminine somehow. I just feel that Joyce gets, well, you know, we could bring up D.H. Lawrence, because he's one which nobody reads anymore. And I say kind of flippantly that, you know, the feminists in the 70s did him in. And then my students will sometimes read him, and they don't understand why we don't read him. Because he is so good at representing women's everything. Their gender, their thinking, their sexuality, their sense of pleasure. And then I have to make things complicated. I think that someone like Lawrence makes women think that they're supposed to be the way that he portrays them. And then they say, oh yeah, he gets me so well. But I don't know. I don't know. If I had a choice between a man writing about a woman or a woman writing about a woman, I'd always choose the woman writing about a woman. Yeah, Woolf is not really spectacular about representing men. You know, her male characters are very, they're not undeveloped, but they don't take up a lot of space. Except for, well, then there's Mr. Ramsay into the lighthouse. And he's pretty, she's trying to represent the way he thinks, but I don't know.
Even Septimus being as problematic as he is, appears to be very real.
But see, here's the issue, is that Septimus and Mr. Ramsay are not thinking and talking about masculinity.
Emerson said something that describes Woolf well, in my humble opinion. He said that in the writings, in the works of Genius After, we rediscover everything that we neglected ourselves, everything about life, paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me.
So she appears to be doing that with male characters, doesn't she?
Well,
bringing up what it was neglected by the actual living, breathing, bleeding males.
This is very complicated. First of all, I think that when Emerson says that, he's not talking about masculinity or femininity.
He's being romantic.
Well, here's the thing. Woolf does write about the details of life. And I would say the quote, and what we mean by that is the quotidian, everyday actions that we take. So I've been wanting to make this connection, which is I finally got or understood how or why creative writing was different from, say, academic writing. And that is that creative writing is based on this sensory details, right? How concrete you can get about what something looks like, smells like, sounds like, feels like, and the more detail that you can give in that, which is exactly what Woolf does, the more you can engage your reader and get an affective response from them.
There is a feeling that American approach to all of these modernities in our contemporary society favors America and its view and its understanding of women's roles, men's roles.
And from my perspective, Britain, people look at, it's Western culture in general.
Right, right.
It's America and it's Europe.
Mm-hmm. And it feels like that when we discuss global modernities, oceanic modernities, and planetary modernities, they are still being placed with the United States and America and Western world in the center.
That's the point, is to get rid of Anglo-American modernism as the center.
While still disregarding experiences of people, specifically women, in those regions that they aim to actually represent. One of the examples would be this great film, Barbie.
Oh yeah, Barbie?
Yes.
Yeah, what about Barbie?
What do you think about this film in terms of helping to promote and address struggles that women have outside of the United States and Western culture?
Oh, outside the United States?
Yes.
Not much, probably. I think it's a movie about capitalism. And it's about gender in capitalism, and it's a telling of the, exploitation of gender in capitalism, but it's a satire. So it turns all the values on the men. So Ken becomes this, inept kind of good-looking nothing, and Barbie grows. She grows and becomes experienced, and she goes. The last scene is she's like going to a gynecologist. I mean, she knows about her body. She can talk about her body. She can think about her body in ways. And then what's the other scene that sticks out in my head is when she's sitting at the bus stop. And she's I think it's the woman is the original designer of the Barbie doll. Now talk about affect. She looks at the woman and stares, and I believe a tear comes out of her eyes, and she says, "You are so beautiful." And you know, in typical ways, this woman is not all that beautiful, and the woman says, "I know," right? And to me, that's like, you know, just rewriting the way capitalism works to show. Well, I don't know. I mean, unless they do Barbie in foreign languages, maybe it would have some effect in foreign countries. Maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Barbies are so global.
They are, but I'm thinking about my mother in the context of this work, and I'm seeing her having still experiencing. But my mother passed away several years ago. But when she was still there, especially living in the post-Soviet Union territory, she was born in Uzbekistan because her parents were deported from Crimea into Uzbekistan. Much of the family died during the process. It was a known genocide, the issues she experienced growing up, going to school, looking for a job, trying to get into higher education, they're very similar to issues that women experienced in the West in like 17th century, in like 16th century, and it's still happening there.
So right. So obviously, but like I'm thinking of somewhere like Japan. Mm-hmm. Right, maybe Barbie would work in Japan.
Maybe in Japan, but I doubt it would work with like in Uzbekistan or even, please forgive me, even in modern Ukraine.
Yeah, I agree with you. Do you know, just so you guys know, so I left the movie and I went into the women's restroom, and all the women in the women's restroom started calling each other Barbie. Hi Barbie, hi Barbie, hi Barbie, in and out, all the way through the whole, it was hilarious, but it was so great.
It's so Woolfian in terms of combining identities into one.
Yeah, and it was enough that, you know, these people are not like English professors, but they got it, right? Mm-hmm. That we're all Barbies. And they were being cynical and, you know, satirical about calling each other Barbie, but we all got it at the same time. I thought it was kind of amazing. Let's get this straight. Okay, so you might hear
That's okay.
sound.
No worries.
So she was friends with the Strachey's, mm-hmm. right? Linton Strachey. And Linton Strachey had a brother named James Strachey who was married to a woman named Alex Strachey. James and Alex went to Vienna. They met and they worked with Freud because they wanted to be trained as psychoanalysts. They came home. They were the ones who translated Freud. They translated, so that's why sometimes we call it, well, we used to call it Bloomsbury Freud before Freud went out of copyright, and now anybody can do it. But so then the Hogarth Press, which they did have in their basement, did publish the Freud for the first time and introduced Freud to England.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying that. The question that I wanted to ask was that Virginia Woolf also pays attention to collective unconscious and collective writing. In her works, there are characters that are either switching identities or several characters becoming one is becoming several. She's familiar with Freudian work, and you already made some psychoanalytical or at least psychological comments during the course of this conversation. But does it mean that we in the English department are partially psychologists? How is psychology getting into our field of expertise, and how do you approach psychology in your personal work?
Well, I don't use Freud as a way to analyze characters, because I think
no psychoanalysis.
Those days are gone.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to look at Freud as a modernist writer who was actually writing these case studies during the modernist period, that's kind of interesting because he talks about narrative, how stories are put together, you know, the story of Dora, for example. I mean, on a very crude level, I mean, interpretation a lot of projection sometimes in psychological. I just find that our psychology majors in the university, they like English too. There is something, but I don't think people are doing, I discourage students from doing like flat out Freudian analysis, because like there was Lacan, right? And he totally reread Freud, so we can't go back to what Freud was doing. I think there was something in the zeitgeist of the turn of the 20th century that allowed someone like Freud and Woolf and Joyce, and we could even take it into the other art forms like music and modern dance, that made people think beyond plot and story and focus on form in and of itself. So, and I don't know what came first, honestly. I have yet to figure that out.
Speaking about media products, I also know that you're fond of The Morning Show. I think we share this
The Morning
fondness.
Show, yes, on Apple TV.
Have you seen the last episode?
The very last episode?
Yeah, the one that aired a couple of days ago.
No, I haven't.
No, okay. It was, I think it was great.
Was it great?
I think it was terrible, but great. Okay, but back to the discussion. So
I'll watch it when I get home.
Spoiler alerts. In The Morning Show, there are two lesbian characters. And
Right.
in our private conversation before, you mentioned that you are curious in how that relationship will be unfolding. What do you think about this relationship?
Well, what I thought was, I thought it would unfold and they would break up, because that's usually what happens with lesbian relationships, right? On TV, they break up. But they actually end up, the last I saw, together. They get back together, and it seems like a very genuine, I mean, I'm hoping they stay together.
Okay,
That's
but
what I'm
as an academic, as a writer, do you see any foreshadowing there?
Of them staying together?
Or not?
I thought I saw foreshadowing in the last episode of them staying together, but you know, they have had a rough time of it. And one woman is, Julianne Margolis is older. I don't know if that means anything, but I guess you're not allowed to tell me. So I don't know.
I just want to spoil it to you because
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Tell me what happens.
Well, they break up.
I knew it. Darn. See, that's my hope, right? My hope is like that maybe for the first time of all the relationships on this crazy show, the lesbian one is the most solid.
But
That's what I would
they
want.
break up because of January the 6th.
Oh.
So, okay, spoiler alert, but one of the characters, Bradley, was in that fictionalized world of the show, recording the insurrection in
And her
the
brother.
capital, and her brother was there, and she deleted those records,
Right.
and her partner found it out. And that was a sufficient evidence for her to call her partner a terrorist, someone who aids and abates a terrorist, and to qualify that as an immoral act. Moreover, lying was involved into this conversation. Again, speaking about Virginia Woolf, Wollstonecraft, Beauvoir, and Affect, it appears like this show is doing a pretty good job trying to show how political life, how personal life, how professional life, academic life, and everything, everything is connected. It creates additional sub-levels of identity markers and affects the way people perceive each other, which affects larger things. So, do you think it's a good choice?
What I'm thinking is, like, if I were with a partner and he or she
try to protect a loved one by lying to government authorities,
or even didn't try to protect, did something that they thought they had to do, well, maybe
is it a good reason for a breakup? Does it mean that there was never love between them?
No, I don't think it's a good reason for a break. I don't think it's a good I mean, I don't know. I've never been there, so what do I know? But like I say, I'm optimist. I guess I'm kind of romantic, even though I'm an affect alien. But it's, but stupid TV, they play with your desires all the time. So it's like manipulating the heck out of me. And maybe that's what makes it so good, is because I think I can double guess it, but I don't, So, but I do like that show.
I want to ask you about your teaching experience, because you are among very few professors that teach LGBT classes. How did you develop those classes? Why, and how does it relate to your personal experiences?
Well, like I said, I think that we always get involved in things that touch us. Well, I don't know if my colleagues think this way. I believe that we teach best if it's something that we can relate to. Now, more than relate to, that's part of our lives that we're trying to figure out. And so I have a child who, and I adopted my child as a single woman, right? So it's a weird rejection of any kind of traditional cis-het kind of paradigm, if you want to know. My child came out as bisexual at 12 or 13, and gay at 16 or 17, and then non-binary at like 21 or 22. And I was okay until we hit the non-binary thing, and that was new to me and very foreign. And so I figured, as a way to get through to my child, I would educate myself by teaching these books and reading and getting to know the LGBTQ plus community in our student body, which is awesome.
One of the reasons I'm asking is because although there is a discussion, there is a discourse, there is a conversation, it feels like people already are understanding the sides of non-binary identities and transgender identities. However, to some students, especially to those who are coming from abroad, from very homophobic countries like Russia, for example, I know I have a thing, I'm biased, but sometimes they have this feeling that they are eavesdropping on the conversation that has been happening for a while.
Well, when you say a while, like how long are you talking? Like before
10, 15 years, maybe
more? It has
more.
been going on for that long.
Yeah.
And it has been going on for the last, in academia, I'd say since 1970s.
Yeah.
But it didn't really gain its power till the 1990s. With like people like Sedgwick and others.
So if we'll start at the beginning of the conversation, how does the field of English literature explore, react, and address the identity markers that are prevalent?
You mean from the very beginning?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the beginning was very binary too. It was, you know, if you weren't heterosexual, you were either lesbian or homosexual. And then we talk about representations of those identities, right, in certain books. But those books didn't get taught very often.
Like Orlando by Virginia Woolf.
You know, though, for a long time, people talked about Orlando's gender transition, but they didn't talk about it in terms of, I mean, I'm talking like 70s and 80s. They didn't talk about it in terms of like gender performativity or non-binariness, where we like just toss out the whole binary issue, because Orlando goes through different periods of history. And in different periods of history, women take certain roles. So in every period that Orlando steps into, there's a specific role that she plays. But I think Woolf was like way ahead of her time, because there's a little, I like to talk about this, there's a little passage in that book where Orlando wakes up and changes from a man to a woman during the 18th century in Turkey. I don't know what that means exactly. And
Erdogan would be unpleased.
Yeah. So, and the book says he went to sleep, and then they woke up and they looked at their body and they saw that they were no longer a man, But for the purposes of convention, we're going to call them she. Right? So Woolf is like using the they pronoun even before any of us thought about using the they pronoun. And I think there's, you know, there's a lot of complexity to be gained from looking more closely at that book. I'm going to be teaching a graduate queer modernism class. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know.
You could add that to your questions. Next fall, of all things. Yeah.
Tell us about this class. What is your plan?
My plan is to teach texts that are known to be modernist and known to be queer. So we would do Orlando, we could do The Well of Loneliness, Forster's Morris, which was posthumously published, Gertrude Stein. There's some more minor writers that wrote more, I guess you could call it middlebrow, which they would write like satires on, not satires, celebrations of the gay community. Oh, and DeJuna Barnes, Nightwood is just the most intense queer novel I've ever read. And I guess the big question, because when I go to my classes, I often don't have the questions answered because I like to, as you know, I like to use my students because, you know, 10 minds are better than one, is like, what is the relationship between modernism and queerness? Like, is modernism queer or is queerness modern? And is it distinct? What are the distinctions of that time period, and how does it anticipate the kinds of things that we talk about now?
Yeah, I like how that links to the area that I'm interested in, because what I feel that is being recurring there is that we keep getting back to this Foucauldian idea that everything that we need right now in these postmodern times was already there.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, modernism is also going through a like expansion, right, a redefinition, because we, you know, basically would think of it as from, say, 1880, that's being generous, to like 1945, the end of the Second World War. But what we as scholars are realizing is that a lot of the qualities of modernism and the styles and techniques are like recurring in contemporary literature. I also think that modernism is the beginning of postmodernism, if that makes sense. In other words, you get post and you think, oh, this is everything after and it's a clear break. But I don't think it's a clear break from modernism. I think it takes certain things to their natural extremes. And that's what becomes postmodern about it.
I would even go as far as to say that modernism and postmodernism can be occurring at the same time in a different place.
Well, yeah, well then we have to be careful. Right, and are we talking about periods, right, periodization, or are we talking about like methods, right? So like you can easily do some kind of postmodern reading of Shakespeare. Does that make Shakespeare postmodern, or is the postmodern part what you're bringing to your reading? I would say it's a strategy for reading.
Yes, I understand your point about methodology, but I'm mostly thinking about writing right now and applying theory in fiction, non-fiction, and academic writing based on geographical locations. For example, modernism and postmodernism that happens in Egyptian literature, or Russian literature, or Ukrainian literature, or French literature would not be the same as American English or Filipinian.
Well, that's up for, right, I get what you're saying. And so what you're talking about is planetary modernism by the critic Susan Stanford Freedman, that says that modernity, right, which is separate from modernism, happens in different civilizations at different historical moments. So in the time when China was, you know, a great cultural power, their breakthrough into modernity happened, you know, hundreds of years before it happened in Britain. Now, I was just at a conference and I was in a seminar on methodology, and some people come down very hard. They say, no, modernism does not take place hundreds of years ago. Now, some people might say it starts in the 18th century, right, with the Enlightenment.
Or with Virginia Woolf's birthday.
Or with Virginia Woolf's birthday, which is, you know, happens to be the same year as Joyce's. The conference I went to was a Modernism conference, but it's dominated primarily by American and British modernism. And if you do any other kind of modernism, say, I met a woman who does Norwegian modernism, right? And then there's Italian modernism and all the things that you're saying, they are very, very marginal.
What do you mean by marginal?
They don't get looked at very much.
Okay.
Unless you're in a comp lit program, and that's a whole nother thing, comparative lit. But I almost feel like comparative lit programs and English departments are starting to become one. The only difference is that we don't have to have all the foreign languages, and we're dealing with translations. And now with translations, I can look at works from different countries and make my own evaluations. I just want to say, though, it's the same difference like when you do a dissertation, right? People say, oh, you have to choose a period, and you have to choose the nationality, and that's the way that it's organized. But any writer that you choose to work on, they didn't just read in their own period. You know, Woolf read the 18th century and the 19th century and before that. So if I'm really going to understand Virginia Woolf, I think I need to understand what she read, so that when I did my dissertation and I proposed doing Woolf in the 18th century, there were a couple people who were like, who is letting her do that? She'll never get a job. And that's when I learned I had to clarify who I was, you know, just for the sake of getting a job. Anyway.
But if you look at current events that are influencing and impacting everything on a global level, is there a potential way of predicting the development of these modernities and modernisms?
No, I couldn't predict it. Nope. I wouldn't even try. I mean, there's, you know, look at like, there's so many countries that are just coming into their own. Look at India, for example, and Africa, oh my gosh. You know, I mean, I know, and China, well, China's already had their time, but China's entering a new period as well. And I really don't know how these things are going to happen.
Can we at least suggest that a new lost generation is being formed?
Like who? Like what?
Like the contemporary writers who are writing right now, who will be writing in future years. I think war in Israel, in Gaza, in Palestine, war in Ukraine would be affecting people. And if you would also like, look back at history, events that are happening right now appear to be mirroring what was happening before. Therefore, there is a potential for a
lost generation.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. When will we find that out? I don't know. I mean, first of all, those cultures, like Ukraine, for example, you need stability before you can figure out like your own cultural narratives, right? And you're in the middle of, it's in the middle of the unknown.
For forming its identity.
Yeah, we don't know how this is going to turn out either. And Israeli literature is an interesting thing too. I mean, I haven't read a lot of it, to be honest, but it's pretty marginalized as well.
What about Palestinian literature?
Oh, for sure.
You write your book on Virginia Woolf and her influence, and her being influenced by Samuel Johnson. So you go back to the 18th century. Yes, but what about the claims you make concerning Virginia Woolf's connection to Romanticism and the 19th century influence?
Well, I don't write on Virginia Woolf and Romanticism in the 19th century, but other people do, because she read everything, and she was definitely influenced by the Romantic poets. And
Keats, for example?
Keats, and even Wordsworth. She wrote about Byron, of all the crazy people, and I think it's, you know, the notion of, well, consciousness again, Romantic poetry, and imagination, creativity. Yeah, it's not the nature stuff that she takes out of them so much as this new view of the individual's, like, how do we stimulate the imagination, and how do we become aware of, how do we raise our consciousness?
Mm-hmm. So why Samuel Johnson is more present in her work?
He's not more present. I just make him seem more present, which is what your books are supposed to do. You're supposed to like inflate the idea that you have to make it so clear and big that people might think, oh, there's nothing else going on. But the truth is, she was equally influenced by other women writers, 19th century writers. I chose that one because when I had to pick my dissertation topic, it was the 11th hour, and they were like, you need to decide what field you're going to be in. And I was just reading a book about Bloomsbury, and it said that they were really influenced by the 18th century, because I was caught between 18th century and modernism, because I find something very modern about the 18th century. Like, you can look at the surface, which is all about reason, satire, etc., but there's also something really kind of creepy going on underneath it, you know, and in terms of sexuality and relationships and so on and so forth. So I read this book and I was like, oh, there's my topic. Let me see. And the thing is okay, and here's a big problem I came up against, and I seem to come up against it a lot in different things that I write on. She never says the 18th century and Samuel Johnson influenced me a lot. She never says that. I had to trace what they both did the same so that I could say she picked this up from him. Like what, you know, I mean, it's been a long time since I've thought about my first book. I told you that when your book comes out, you smell it, because new books smell great. Mm. And then I flipped and I found a typo. And I never looked at the book again, ever, because it was just too much to bear. But what I was interested in that book was dialogics. I guess I'm always, conversation is a trope that goes on in, and it's like Bakhtinian, because it's like, multiple voices going on in one text. And, if you can go slowly through it, you can say, oh, this,
Heteroglossia?
Yeah, heteroglossia. But, like Virginia Woolf's essays is called The Common Reader, right? With the pun on being a reader and the reader. And that term comes from Johnson. And so the question is, what did he mean by it? And is she following? I mean, I did have a chapter on one of the novels. I mean, I assume I'm talking to students here to say who are writing their dissertations. I wrote a whole chapter on a novel, and I had to get rid of it because it just didn't work. That's what they mean by the agony of the writer, right? It's when you sit down and you write something and you pour yourself into it, and then you've got to be honest and say, this is not working, I got to get rid of this. So anyway, so that's how it all happened. And that led to my second book, which was a collaboration with a graduate student who I had met when I was a graduate student at a conference. That's why I encourage all graduate students to go to conferences, because you never know which person you meet is going to be a collaborator. And all it takes is looking to the person on your left on a panel and saying, you want to put together a collection of essays? And they say, yeah. And you say, I'll be in touch. And that's what you do. And so I met my collaborator, and we worked on the essays again. And then I got to write for the Oxford Companion to Virginia Woolf. I am now officially the expert on Virginia Woolf's essays. And I do it because I like to write essays. And I'm trying to learn how to write nonfiction from Virginia Woolf.
Steven Tyler was accused of sexual violence against women.
Yeah. What do I think?
What do you think? And
it's a bad thing. You shouldn't be violent against women.
Terrible thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Just
because he's like, the rock and rollers, they got their issues, I mean.
I guess I'm more curious in this happens, 7 years after METOO started? And
well, no, METOO was just like right before COVID, wasn't it?
I thought it was like 2017.
Like around Harvey Weinstein, that was probably the big.
Harvey Weinstein, was it 2018? 17?
2017.
17, yes.
Okay, so
the trial came up later again, right? So it's kind of was delayed, and it's kind of a continual thing, I think, in a lot of ways.
So maybe even a bit earlier.
So you're saying, like, because Me Too has been around and he's still doing, and this is still happening? We live in a patriarchy. I mean, it's not going to change in my lifetime. And it's going to take a long time, a long time.
How do we kill patriarchy?
How do we
kill patriarchy?
Well,
yes.
we allow women to continue to be educated. We get women voted into government and leadership positions. We let women make a lot of money, so they can give money to the places that will help women. In fact, that's one of the things Virginia Woolf said. You know, she was like in a room of one's own. I like to say this in front of my non-majors because I have business majors, women in there. And, you know, I was trying to say this today because usually we look at, like, if you're eager for money, you know, you're kind of a sellout, you're being superficial. But Woolf would say, if we're going to make room for Shakespeare's sister, the reason we don't have it is because women weren't allowed to own property and they weren't allowed to make money for like a lot of years until about 120 years ago. So they weren't working on Wall Street. They didn't make, you know, do hedge funds. They are now, right? And so that they could pour this money back into, I don't know, Planned Parenthood or, you know, a women's college and supporting females. I mean,
a potential objection could be, and I'm not professing what I think, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. And a potential objection could be that this has already been happening, the choice is already there, the payment inequality can be explained by other factors that are not gender linked and stuff like that. So how would you respond to that objection?
Well, you mean these changes are happening and that women are great? Well, here's the thing, like even in academia, you know, I've been here for quite a while and there were very few women when I started. And then we hired more women. And then people say, oh, the English department's doing great. They've hired 6 women, right? But it's not about hiring women, it's about who has the power, right? So even if we have a female chair, is she being respected in the same way a male chair would be, or is she being challenged in ways that a male chair hasn't been? So we may be, first of all, and it's how many thousands of years, you know, that women, you know, have been in this subordinate position. 150 is not very long. And there's always the glass ceiling, right, where you go to a certain point and you can't move anymore. I could complain, but I won't. Mm-hmm. I don't think in the long run that the female faculty have been treated the same as male faculty. I think it's true that women have to work twice as hard and be twice as good and do twice as much to get exactly the same thing that most, I won't say all, but most male faculty get.
Mm-hmm. Can we pass a law that prohibits all men from holding state positions for at least 100 years?
I always think of the Greek play Lysistrata. Mm-hmm. Isn't that the one where all the women get together and they say, if you don't stop the war, we're not going to give you sex anymore? Mm-hmm. That's all we need to do.
Okay. But that's a bit manipulative.
There's a movie called Chirac.
Spike Lee's movie.
Yeah, Spike Lee movie where that's the plot but put into Chicago.
Yeah.
Wait, what's the name of the movie?
Chirac.
It's
Chirac.
a contemporary, like.
Oh, I'm going to see that.
It's pretty good.
It's really good, yeah.
Yeah, I love Spike Lee. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's even done in verse, and so. It's,
awesome.
Yeah, so it's kind of like reminds.
Does he have like a group of people that are like a chorus?
I don't remember if there's a chorus.
I don't remember. It's been
I think there might have been a chorus though. It reminds me a little of the adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. That's kind of very modernized with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's kind of like an
yeah.
I think we'd be able to put some trailer information
Yeah, it's great.
and
Worth a watch.
advertise.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what I think. I think that we women just need to speak out. Sometimes I'm what do they call it, a lightning rod? Because between its age too, is that I've reached a certain age where I can't wait for someone else to speak up. And I also think, as a full professor, I have a certain amount of power. Not a lot of power, but I have more power than others. And I feel it's my responsibility to speak up for women when they can't speak up for themselves.
Okay.
One more thing.
Yes.
I also feel that men and male students have a lot of support, whereas the female students do not necessarily have that support. Could be wrong. So I'm dedicated to helping women students. I help men students too, but I really feel that women students need that extra sense that somebody's looking out for them, and networking, right, too, with other women, like saying to a woman faculty at another place, I have this student, right? Okay, that's all I have to say.
A follow-up question, but I'm sorry.
Don't apologize.
Thank you. Isn't using this particular dichotomy, men, women, is just a continuation of Cartesian duality and separation into one another, instead of trying to move into unifying path that doesn't separate between men and women?
That's a very beautiful thought, but we do come from a Cartesian split world, and we still live in a world that distinguishes between men and women. I am looking forward to my kids' generation and your generation, but even a little younger, who don't see these distinctions. That's where I think some real change is going to happen. I wish I were in the heads of younger people, because I don't know where they got this thinking from. I mean, I guess they got it from each other. That's why I go on to social media, is to find out where all this info is coming from. So yeah, you're right, but it is what the truth is that there's a separation. There's real politics, right? Politics are real, and there's the ideal, right? But I'm pretty pragmatic these days. I used to be very idealistic.
So now it's time for a game. I came up with a game for you. And
is this where I need my glasses?
You might, yes, because I'm going to show you several images.
Okay.
And those are emojis. And emojis hide... No, I'm not explaining what emojis are.
All right. I know what an emoji
no mansplaining here. The set of emojis hides a title of one of Virginia Woolf's works.
You mean,
so
and I'm supposed to...
Your goal is to unpack that riddle and tell me which Virginia Woolf's novel is hidden behind these images. And I'm going to put them on the screen so people will get a chance to guess too. And we can even pause. So yes, if you want to participate in this game, feel free to pause when you'll see pictures showing up on the screen. So I'm going to show them to you.
Okay, so are these 3 different novels or one?
No,
novel?
This is one novel. 3 emojis describing one novel.
Waves.
Which novel is that?
The Waves? I don't know.
No.
Oh, it's not. Let's see. So what do we have here? We have a sun. We have a wave. And we have...
like an island or something, land?
A lighthouse? Is it?
Yes, it is the lighthouse.
See, but you know, you put up like a wave. Okay.
Oh.
All right.
How about this one?
All right. All right. So we have a flower. We have time. Time passes to the lighthouse. No, did I just say that one?
Yeah, the lighthouse is...
time, and then someone's walking.
And the flowers.
And Mrs. Dalloway said
yes.
she get the flowers herself. Okay, I got
Very
that
good.
one.
Very good. How about this one?
All right. And these are all Virginia Woolf novels?
All Virginia Woolf novels.
All right, so we have a castle, we have a globe, and we have a rainbow. Oh, I don't know. This is in Orlando, is it?
It is.
Orlando.
It is Orlando.
Well, okay, good.
Oh, good.
Thank you. The castle and the rainbow gave it away.
Okay.
Okay.
How about this one?
A room of one's own.
How do you do that?
Because it's a bathroom icon
Uh,
for like women's room, a room, and there's books. I don't get the suitcase, but 2 out of the 3 is okay.
I think suitcase has something to do with money, job, and
Oh,
being able
money.
to.
You could have put a dollar bill thing.
That would be too telling.
Yeah. So, but I still got it. Okay, come on, hit
Immediately.
me with another one.
And last one.
Oh, it's got the same ones on it.
Yes, but slightly different.
So, the waves, the sun, and what is this other thing? Like, are they twins?
People, relationship.
People and relationships. This one isn't the waves, is it?
It is.
It is.
Yes.
Okay.
Full circle. Started with the waves, almost. And
Okay.
ended with the waves. That was great. That was like 5 out of 5, and pretty good.
What do I get?
Yeah, you get a confirmation of being a Virginia Woolf scholar and expert.
Yay.
Yeah.
I hope that makes up for
Validation.
every other mistake and misdate I've said during this whole interview.
Now it's time for Blitz. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Those are going to be brief questions except for one. And you don't have to answer briefly. You can take as much time as you want.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question, Virginia Woolf or Simone de Beauvoir?
Simone de Beauvoir.
Okay. If you had to pick just one and get rid of the rest, poetry, nonfiction, or fiction?
The one I'm going to keep? Poetry.
Poetry, okay. Describe feminism in only 3 words.
All women together.
New York Times, New York or Las Vegas?
New York, of
New
course.
York, okay. Best 3 contemporary women writers that are not American.
Elena Ferrante, Annie Arnaud. These are the most contemporary that are popping into my head. And if we're gonna, I don't know. I like Nawal El-Saadawi. She's Egyptian. Can I give one more? Tsitsi Dangaremga. She's African, but I forget which.
Actually, we can show all of them. So if you want to name more than 3, you're more
I
than
like
welcome.
Tove Ditlevsen, who is modern. She's like Danish, but I went to my Modernist Studies conference and I asked people if they knew who she was, and no one knew who she was. I think I have something to write on. So, yeah. Oh, and Clarice Lispector, of course. Okay.
Thank you. In serious fiction, the highest kind of suspense involves the Sartorian anguish of choice. That is, our suspenseful concern is not just with what will happen, but with the moral implication of action. This is a quote from John Gardner on writing fiction, and so the Sartorian anguish refers to the possibility of negating freedom. And in this context, in the context of this quote, do you think that academia in its modern state negates human freedom?
That's heavy. Well, all right, let me ask you to explain this. So you're saying that it's the future results of things?
Yes. Our concern is not really with what the future holds, but with the modern choice of freedom. And in Sartorian view, we are being thrown into freedom. Freedom is not something that we actually choose, but what happens within the freedom is an element of choice. Like, for example, Sisyphus, who is pushing the rock, is absolutely free, according to a starter, because Sisyphus can make a choice, a specific choice, to pick the purpose of the action, to act in order to achieve the objective, and to achieve what is chosen.
So you're asking me if academia makes us free or not?
In a way, yes.
No.
Yeah, okay. So it
'Cause
negates our
limits,
freedom.
yeah, because it limits our choices via curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
right? And bureaucracy and what is allowed and credits and degrees and all that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be human today?
I'm tempted to say that it means the same thing it's always meant. And I'm not talking post-human, and I'm not being theoretical about it. I'm not being intellectual about it. I'm just thinking in my own life, what does it mean to be human? And what it means to be human is to feel things, is to feel. And yes, there's lots of technology that gets into the way of feeling, you know, because it's a way of distancing yourself. I just think of the young people with social media. I even do it. Like I'll probably go home tonight and they'll say, whew, I need to relax, and put on the Instagram like I'm putting on television, and next thing I know, 45 minutes goes by, right? But that doesn't change what being human is. So that's just what I have to say.
So what was human before that remained?
Well, just what I'm saying. I'm using the words feelings,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't mean that. I guess I mean experiencing things as an individual, psychologically, emotionally, personally, just or with books or through art. You know, I'm definitely an aesthete in that way, that I think life should make us feel. And that's what it means to be human, is to feel. And if you're a good creative writer, you make your readers feel. And maybe if you're a good scholar, you can make your readers feel something too. I mean, hopefully it's not all in the head, right? It's something that moves you to say, oh, I see, this makes a difference, right? So that's what I think. I like to tell my students this, because Virginia Woolf was a writer, right? So students get freaked out because she killed herself. Like usually students know that even before having written anything. And then they'll read like Mrs. Dalloway to the Lighthouse and they'll say, oh, no wonder she killed herself. Look at like what she did. So then I have to explain that no, she was like totally in her right mind when she wrote those things, because you can't write those things when you're in bouts of madness. Okay, so she had gone through these periods, and near the end of her life, when the Blitz in London, and London was being bombed, and their house in London was bombed, and they were living in the country, and they could hear the planes going over. And, you know, she's married to a Jew, and she was trying to write, but she saw no future for the world because of what was happening around her. And she couldn't see an audience. Like, she didn't know who to write to, because audience is so important, right, to grounding our own point of view. And she felt herself losing her grip, right? And she'd already been sick twice, and her husband took care of her, but she also felt like she was not, and she says this in her suicide notes, that she just would not make it back. Like, she just didn't think she would recover from this one. And she didn't want Leonard to spend his life taking care of an invalid. And so she decided to kill herself. But what I find amazing is that she wrote drafts of her suicide notes. And what I say to my students is, that is a writer, right? So, and not a not a person who's not in control.